The government's so-called misinformation bill is heating up, with it now undergoing a Senate inquiry into the legislation. However, that notwithstanding, the usual suspects have come out in support of more and more censorship. Case in point is voice architect Megan Davis, who also happens to be a professor at UNSW. She said the misinformation laws would prevent so-called Trumpian lies in the voice referendum. Now, exactly what a Trumpian lie is not entirely clear. After all, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have their own difficulties with the truth. And Megan Davis herself has had some challenges, shall we say, during the referendum, and indeed during her comments about so-called Trumpian lies. So let's have a look at this. And if you've got any thoughts about the referendum, about misinformation, or about the link between the two, well, let me know that in the comments below. So let's start with what Megan Davis said most recently about misinformation. She is quoted in The Australian as saying, "The ABC constantly emailed all of the Aboriginal staff at UNSW saying, quote, 'We're desperately looking for a no activist from La Perouse. Can someone find us one, please? Because we've got this debate coming up.' We have to do all of this and the ABC interaction on the basis of the most ridiculous arguments that were not even plausible legal arguments, but just because they wanted this balance. It's completely sick. It affects the way we structure and report stories, because they say if you can't get someone who's a no voter, you can't put on someone who is a yes. In essence, she's getting the idea that you need to find a no person to go against a yes person to run a segment. She's seemingly implying that the ABC was going out of its way to try to stymie yes, but getting no supporters. In essence, the ABC was somehow biased against the yes campaign, which would be news to anyone who was alive during 2023 and saw anything on the ABC. Because if anything, the ABC was biased against the no campaign and in favour of the yes campaign. The ABC was not hurting the yes campaigners, the ABC was helping. It beggars belief that one would think that the ABC was somehow trying to harm the voice referendum getting up. She seems to be living in a parallel universe. Megan Davis also said that this false equivalence on the ABC was giving voters the impression that Indigenous populations were split on the voice, despite polling indicating vast support. It was impossible for us to articulate our case, because journalists would come to us with the most farcical and absolutely offbeat questions. So let's unpackage this a little bit. Firstly, in terms of the polling, well, the polling on Indigenous populations was not exactly great, because polling Indigenous populations is rather challenging due to the geographic barriers one sometimes faces in places like the Northern Territory, and also in terms of getting people to respond to polls. Now, there are ways of weighting and rebalancing polls to account for this, but it does mean there's always going to be quite a large margin of error. So simply claiming that polling indicated vast support is a little bit disingenuous and itself a little bit misleading. Furthermore, one also needs to look at the ABC's response to Megan Davis's claims, because the ABC hit back, and the Australian also reports the ABC disputed Megan Davis's account, quoting them as saying, "We do not agree with Professor Davis's comments. The advice to managers in the lead-up to the voice referendum was to ensure that each of the programs and platforms they manage had a genuine diversity of perspectives. Teams were explicitly told that a 50-50 balance of advocates was not required. The coverage was high quality and successfully included diverse voices and opinions from all parts of Australia. The ABC was ever mindful of its responsibility to facilitate a comprehensive but responsible debate in an impartial manner." So in essence, the ABC is claiming that Megan Davis is spreading misinformation with her claims about the ABC, which is a bit ironic. The ABC is saying Megan Davis is being misleading about what she's saying about the reporting. I can't help but laugh at how hypocritical some of her comments might be then, because if misinformation laws were going to prevent Trumpian misinformation and lies, well then presumably it would also be preventing her statements, because the ABC is claiming that her statements are misinformation. Then we also need to look at Megan Davis's own institute during the conduct of the voice referendum. Here in particular, I'm looking at the organization called the Uluru Dialogue, or the Uluru Statement, run out of UNSW. Now, this particular organization put out some tweets that are, at best, disputed, and that is putting it rather charitably. I've talked about this before, but I do want to highlight it. In particular, they put out this tweet, or this X as it's now called, about 6 important facts about The Voice. Apparently 1, it will be independent from the government. 2, it will provide advice to Parliament and the government. 3, it will be an elected body drawn from local communities. 4, it will have remote area representation. 5, it will have equal numbers of women and men. 6, it will not run programs or handle any funding. Now, all 6 of those points are news to me, because if you look at the actual text of what the referendum was going to do, none of those things were covered. It didn't say anything about how the voice body would be made up. It said nothing of the sort. Therefore, making claims about what the voice body would be comprised of, or what the voice body would do, was simply misleading. This would be misinformation under the government's proposed law, because it is clearly misleading, because none of these 6 supposed facts are in any way, anywhere featured in the referendum text. They could be brought into being via legislation, but at the time of the referendum, no legislation existed that would indicate this, and even if there were, that legislation could be changed over time. Therefore, these 6 pointers are not facts about the voice, they're not even vaguely accurate conjectures, because they are simply not anywhere to be found in any of the constitutional legislative text. Then you've got the whole debate over how long the Uluru Statement itself was. You might recall there was debate about the Uluru Statement, which was the document giving rise to the whole voice referendum, which itself was calling for the voice. However, the Uluru Statement also called for things such as a makarata and the like. Now, the Uluru Statement had some words that required definition, which gave rise to the debate about what exactly those words meant, which then gave rise to an investigation into those. And lo and behold, Peter Credlin found a longer document also called the Uluru Statement that defined some of those words and the thinking going behind them. It was documenting some of the discussions in the lead up to the voice, telling us what a makarata or what a treaty might involve, which would involve reparations. Now, Megan Davis herself, at one point, said the Uluru Statement was longer than just the one-page document on the Uluru Statement website.
Here's one of the voice architects, Professor Megan Davis, in the Parkes oration in 2018, where she says, and I quote, "The Uluru Statement from the Heart isn't just the first one-page statement. It's actually a very lengthy document of around 18 to 20 pages. And she'd know better than anyone because she was there at Uluru and she was instrumental in the drafting of the Statement from the Heart."
A very powerful part of the Uluru Statement from the Heart is that it isn't just the first, one-page statement. It's actually a very lengthy document of about 18 to 20 pages.
She specifically said you would need to read the background documents. And so Peter Credlin did, and then informed everyone about the background documents. But then Megan Davis backflipped and said the Uluru Statement was just one page, and went out of her way to say that Peter Credlin and others were spreading misinformation about the length of the Uluru document. Now, to my mind, regardless of how long the Uluru Statement actually was, whether it was 1 page or 26 pages or 100 pages, the fact still remains that that one-page document had vague words that required definition, and therefore it was never just one page. Rather, it was one page plus the definitions of those words, because we need a definition of a treaty, a definition of a makarata, a definition of all of these words to be informed about what the document actually means. It is misleading to claim otherwise. It is misleading to claim that you don't need the definitions of those words to understand the document. And therefore, one can also see additional false misleading information being spread by the Yes campaign. And therefore, one could argue the Yes campaign was spreading misinformation, and therefore one could also argue that, amongst other things, the reason the voice referendum failed was indeed misinformation, but as of course people could see through the misinformation from the Yes campaign and could see that they were gaslighting and trying to pull the wool over people's eyes. And therefore, rather ironically, if the government's misinformation campaign actually got up, well, one would think it should actually crack down on people like the Yes campaign in the referendum, or people like the Uluru Dialogue, or indeed in this context, Megan Davis. Because, like I've said, the ABC disputes her account and is arguing that it is misleading and therefore misinformation. Quite ironically. But let me know your thoughts about all of the cry bullies crying foul about misinformation while spreading it themselves in the comments below. I'd be interested to hear what you think.